Let me start because I'm going to talk generally to begin with. So, a lot of you have trouble doing ruffles. So, I'm going to show you how to do triple cover ruffles. Now, some of you I know don't have cover stitch. So, I just want to say that you can still make ruffles on the serger. Um, I have some here. So, these are some ruffles I did on the serger. And you're going to use a 4 thread overlock, and you are going to put your differential feed on 2. That's what makes the gathers, is the differential feed. So as long as you have that on 2, you can make gathers with the serger. But the downside of the serger, not that there is ever a downside of the serger, is that you can only sew them on the edge, right? So you could only sew them to another strip. And in this case, I probably, in fact, sure, use my ruffler foot to do the sewing it to the edge and gathering it. So I have done lives on that. I will find it tomorrow, and I will put it up in the group because I'm sure there's some of you here that haven't seen it and want to know how to ruffle using the serger. But tonight we're really looking at cover stitch, which has just come in. He's going to help me with questions because I have real trouble keeping up with the questions. So there's a few questions that people always ask about ruffling. First one is they tell me they didn't get any ruffles. Well, first of all, check that you have your differential feet on 2, whatever ruffle you're doing, cover stitch or serging. And make sure you don't pull on the frill as you ruffle it. But do understand that some fabrics just aren't suitable to ruffle. And I think that's the biggest problem. A heavy, stiff, thicker fabric and knit, none of those really gather that successfully, in my opinion. Um, but a lightweight cotton does. And the other question people ask me is how many, how long do they have to cut their ruffle? Well, you never really know, but think about 2 to 1. So my ruffle should be twice as long as my strip. Okay. So those I think are the immediate questions. There was something else I thought of. No, can't think of it. It doesn't it doesn't ruffle when you pull on the strip. Oh, one of the advantages of ruffling on the serger is that you can actually gather your piece of fabric, pull up the threads, and then fit it onto your dress or whatever you're sewing. So that's another consideration. You can do that on the serger. You can sew with your stitch length on 4, and then what you're going to do is you're going to pull up the needle threads, and you can get more gathers in that ruffle and make it shorter. So that's well worth remembering because that's a useful thing to do. So I have got a slideshow. So actually, I'll show you a few more things first. So in the Serger Club last month, we did. This is done on the serger. You can see that the frill is sewn into a seam, as it has to be when you're using the serger. Mind you, you could always gather it and then sew it on too. So, there are options, but this is done using it in the seam. And then the other bag we did in Serger Club, we actually did use triple cover stitch, and we gathered down the middle of the frill. Okay, so that was the advantage of using cover stitch. I couldn't have done that with a serger stitch because it's in the middle of the fabric. So let us have a look. I'm going to put the slideshow up and I'm just going to talk you through a few things. And then I'm actually going to show you how I do my ruffles that you see in the picture. So let's get that up there. Right. So we talked about that, how you can make ruffles on the serger and pull them up. But we're looking at making ruffles using cover stitch. And I said the reason they don't gather is the fabric's too soft or too thick or too stiff, I should have put. Um, do not pull on the ruffle fabric as it's feeding through. And a rolled edge can sometimes stop it gathering as much as you'd like, just because it's very stiff and it wants to stand out. So I had that on one of the things. So quite often I'll use a 3 thread narrow or a 3 thread overlock on a short stitch length. Now, the other weapon to have is the shearing foot or the ruffler foot, and people get confused with those two things. The ruffler foot has two mouths on it, so you're going to feed the ruffle in underneath the foot and the fabric you're sewing it to on the top. Okay, and you're going to sew the two together, so it's a very useful foot. But the shearing foot can't do that. The shearing foot will just gather a single piece of fabric. Okay, so that's the difference between them. Can you gather with your regular foot? Yes, you can. If you don't have a shearing foot, you can gather with your regular foot on the baby locks. On the Benina L890, you need to use either the shearing foot or the cover and chain foot if you're gathering. It's not going to work with your regular foot. So just a slight variation there. So let's look at these ruffled hems. The top ruffle I finished with a rolled edge on the serger. And that's a tip I want to give you. When I do use a rolled hem on a ruffle, I always move my differential feed. Or this is just for sewing the lower edge, not the gather, just the lower edge. I move my differential feed all the way down to zero point 0.6. Okay, and I used a 12 weight thread in my upper looper, and that's for the bottom edge of the top ruffle. And on the second ruffle, you can see I've got a big band of pink there. That's actually a 3-thread overlock wide. I don't know why I did that because 9 times out of 10 I'll use a narrow, but it looks quite pretty, so I left it. And in that case, I put the 12 weight thread in the upper looper. Okay, and I did that before I gathered. Are you having trouble, Richard? Richard's in us helping me with questions tonight. Okay. So the stiffness of the rolled edge can prevent it gathering a little. That's just all I want to say to you. It doesn't always happen, but it can. Okay. And I actually have one here with a rolled edge, and you can see it's still gathered nicely. It's just that the ruffle sticks out a bit. Anyway, that's enough on that. So those are the two edges I used, a rolled edge and a 3-thread overlock wide. And I did that on the ruffle before I actually gathered it. So, what is the advantage of individual ruffles? Well, I think they're really great because you can make the whole ruffle as a separate unit and then attach it to your bag. And there's a big reason why you want to do that. Now, understand if you're going to use triple cover stitch to gather your ruffle, you cannot pull it up. Okay, you cannot pull it up, but that's quite an advantage sometimes because it also means it can't come undone. So it just sets the gathers. So what I like is when I've done it, it's a nice stable unit to attach to a dress or skirt or bag or anything like that. It's all gathered, it's done. It's not going to come ungathered. It's very neat. And you can then put it on your skirt and sew it. But one of the biggest advantages of it is you can fit it to your skirt or whatever you're doing. So let me take that down and let me just show you a few things. Do I have any questions, Richard? He doesn't know. Right. Hmm. Yes, it's already up. So here is the individual ruffle, and you can see it's got really nice, neat gathers, and it's stable. So it's not going to come undone. I can just attach it to a bag by sewing it on near those stitches. So that's what I like about it. So let me show you the big advantage is that if I could do my ruffle, and I did. I've got 2 different finishes on this bag. So I did one where I sewed the piece of fabric was flat, and I just sewed the ruffle after I completed the whole unit onto the flat piece of fabric. Okay, so how am I going to deal with the ends? Well, at that point, I then turned this, sewed up the back seam, and you can see that my frill is actually tied into the seam because that was the only way I could hide the ends if I did it this way. You can also see I didn't match it perfectly, and I left that because that quite often is what happens, when you're sewing a seam and you're sewing your ruffles in. I've gone out of focus. Am I out of focus? I look good here. Okay, so here is the seam where I have it's directly underneath this seam, which I'm having trouble holding it up. Can you see how invisible the the seam is in the bottom one? Because let me get it. What I did was I completed that seam before I attached it to the bag. And the big advantage is one, it matches perfectly, and two, it's not sewn into the fabric. It's loose, it's free, which is good because this one actually comes below the bottom of the dress or bag or whatever you want it to be. So I've finished it nicely and sewn it on, and it fitted perfectly. Okay, do we have any questions? Because I've given you quite a lot of information in that bit, and I'm sure somebody. Yes, I can show you the back of the ruffle. I am. He's trouble. I don't know why I asked him to come and help me. Right. So you see, that's the back. Well, it could be the front too, but I chose it to be the back, and I'll show you a bit more on that in a second. But you see how perfect the tucks are. So yes, anything else, Richard? Perhaps it's when I go close up with samples, it looks it. Right. So I talked about why I like individual ruffles, and I told you that my favorite way of finishing them is to match the two ends together, make sure it's the same size as my bag. I haven't got there yet. Richard said, what stitch is used to attach it to the fabric? I'm going to use a sewing machine stitch actually, but there you go. So I would sew this across the seam. And I would do that on the sewing machine. And the reason I do it on the sewing machine is it will allow me to open the seam out and press it flat. So I have less bulk. Okay. So there's another consideration. But let me go back to the slides because I kind of tell you that in the slides. Well, I do tell you that in the slides. So we talked about the individual ruffles. I told you that the advantage is that you're not going to have to sew the ends of the ruffles into the fabric. Maybe you can see more clearly in the slideshow that one, I didn't match them very well, and two, that fabric is completely sewn into the seam, whereas the one below it, the seam is directly below that, and you can see it's not sewn into the fabric seam. So it just looks a whole lot nicer. So how to gather using triple cover stitch? Well, you're going to set up for triple cover stitch. My advice for this is to use your shearing foot if you have one, otherwise your regular foot or your covered chain foot. And your differential feed on 2 is all you need to remember because that will cause the gathers. So you're going to set your differential feed to 2. Okay, now if you have the Benina L890, you need to use your cover and chain foot or a shearing foot. No, cover and chain foot for triple cover. Cover and chain foot for triple cover. You do have a shearing foot, but your shearing foot doesn't have a hole for the cover needles. Okay, so hopefully they'll bring one out that does, but it doesn't mean you can't do it. You just have to use the cover and chain foot for the banana. Okay, so next. How did I finish the top edge? Well, I've told you that I used triple cover to gather the frill. And then what I also did was I have an 8-thread machine here. Okay, I'm talking about the Triumph or the Evolution or the I can't think of it. Anyway, if you have an 8-thread machine, you can triple gather and you can add in a finishing stitch on the edge. And here I have added in, what have I got? 3-thread narrow. Is it narrow? Yes. I've got 3-thread narrows set up to finish the raw edge. Now, some of you are asking me, how do I do a gather with a raw edge? Well, you just don't add in that finishing stitch of the 3-thread narrow. Okay, you could just gather with cover stitch. So I have my machine set up for triple cover stitch and also 3-thread overlock. And I have in my case, it's not always the case, but in this case, I have the decorative thread in the lower looper and the chain looper, okay? Because we're going to sew this ruffle from the wrong side, and I'll show you why when I do it. I set my stitch width to 5, my stitch length to 3, and my automatic stitch selector to B. Okay, so I think the best thing at this point is to show you how I did that. So let's put you onto the other machine. Whoops, I took the wrong one out. Right, just move it over. Right, so I have my machine set up, and I know you're going to question what I said. I said I have it set for triple cover, so I have the 3 triple cover needles in, and I have it set for a 3-thread narrow. I have decorative thread in my chain looper and decorative thread in my lower looper, okay? And the reason for that is I am going to sew this so that my chain looper thread is on the right side, because I think that sort of crisscrossy stitch looks prettier than 3 straight stitches. Okay, so I think you can see it here. I've got to make sure I've actually got my differential feed on 2, because that is what is going to create the gathers, and I have my shearing foot on. So I'm going to lift my foot up, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you how it works and what happens. So here's hoping. So I've got the wrong side facing up because my decorative stitch is on the underside. And can you see I'm getting gathers? And what I want to do is make sure I don't pull on the fabric, so that I'm encouraging the fabric in rather than holding it taut. Otherwise, it won't get any gathers. And there you have it. Do you see how I've got my decorative stitch on the front, my decorative threads on the front? So I've got the underside of triple cover on the front here where the gathers are, and the top's finished with a 12-weight decorative thread. So I know the light changes when I move. So pretty cool. Let me just see. I think it's almost easier to see on the yellow because it's a lighter color. So I did exactly the same on this one. Okay, I sewed it from the wrong side to get the decorative threads on the top. And I could have used a 3-thread overlock wide, could have used a heavier thread, all sorts of things. But it's pretty, isn't it? So do I have any questions? I'm not actually using 8 threads. I am using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, I'm using 6 threads. I'm using the 3 chain needles, the chain looper, the lower looper, the upper looper, and the O2 needle. Okay. Yeah, somebody wanted me to cover the stitches again. Don't forget you've got the written notes, because I know you don't always catch everything I say. That's why I do the written notes, because it gives you a chance to go back and have that information available to you. So yes, pretty cool, I think. Let's see what else it says in the notes, because I forget. I used 12-weight decorative thread for this project. hmm But you could use 8. It would have no problem with 8. It would almost look prettier with 8. I just happened to use 12, but it would look prettier with 8, especially in the chain looper. So I set my stitch width to 5, my stitch length to 3, and my automatic stitch selector on 8. Okay, and I kept my knife table up there, so I was cutting. Well, except I didn't cut, I just used it as a guide. So if you have a cover stitch only machine like the Euphoria, you can still do the decorative gathers. You can still get the decorative gathers. And if you want to finish the top edge, you can take it to your serger and just sew around with a 3-thread narrow. Or you can have a raw edge above your gathers. Okay, so if you don't have a combo machine like I'm using today, which is allowing me to do both at the same time, then you could do it. You just have to do it twice. So I just wanted to touch on the Benina. Benina's a 5-thread machine, so you could just use a chain stitch to gather. Um, I'm I'm actually, and I do want to say, don't use your regular foot. I'm actually going to do some more work on that because I don't really have the definitive answer for that, and I'm going to speak to my friends that are specialists there and get some more advice for you. So I will post up about the Benina. Only as I said, the shearing foot doesn't have holes in the cover stitch side. But you can still get a gather using your chain foot, okay, on the Benina. So as I showed you, I joined the end of my ruffles. I joined the end of my ruffles. They were the same size as my fabric panel, and I had a 1/2 inch seam on each. And I used my sewing machine purely because I wanted to open out that seam, okay, to make it thinner so that it would gather better. Now, when I attached it to my piece of my bag, as it is in this case, I drew a guideline on my fabric because that just makes it easier. And then I placed the top of the ruffle up to it. And it's the same size as my bag. So I then pinned it in place and I took it to my sewing machine. Now, I think some things are just easier to do on the sewing machine than the serger. So I could have used a chain stitch. Absolutely, I could, but it was just as easy to use my sewing machine. And I kept my stitch very near the bottom pink stitch so that there was a bit of excess above at the top of the ruffle, although it's so neat that you barely notice it, you know. So do I have any questions? I have loads of questions. Okay, let me take this out and then yes, the banana can definitely gather with cover stitch. It just can't do this a stitch on the right at this time. I don't think so. Let me check that out because I fought with it for a while, and the person I speak to I know has had that bad weather today, so I didn't want to trouble her. So I will get back to you on that one. Sorry, I don't have more information. Only I couldn't make it work for me at quite the same. Is there a way to make a tighter ruffle? Well, no, because you can't on cover stitch, you cannot pull it up. The maximum, the tightest ruffle you're going to get is using your differential feed all the way up to 2. If you don't want it quite that ruffly, then reduce your chain looper tension. No, reduce your differential feed. Don't touch your chain looper. Yeah. Spandex, it's just too thick. I, you know, I think you'll have more success using cover stitch to gather on knits than you do the serger. So that's something, but I do find it hard to gather knits or spandex or anything like that on these machines. But, give it a go because, you never know. You never know. Oh, I definitely finish the edge of the ruffle first because you're working flat and it's just much easier. And then you're going to go in and gather it. So I'd finish the lower edge first. Benino 890, let me come back to you. You can absolutely gather with triple cuff stitch. So, and then you can always go round with the 3-thread overlock. So you can still do it. You just can't do it necessarily in one step, I don't think. But, it's only a 2-step thing. And you do get a lovely gather with triple cover on the Bonino. I am on YouTube. I don't do my lives to YouTube. I just record them and put them in my YouTube channel. What is a bit confusing is my YouTube channel is Deborah Canham. Okay, so I think that might catch a few of you out. It caught me out. I don't know how that happened. New to the group and just happened upon this live. When do they usually happen? Generally on a Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern. I try and do every Monday, but it doesn't always work out. But I will be here next Monday, 7 p.m. Somebody's asking me if they have a printout. Yes, if you go to my group, my Facebook group, not this page, but Facebook group, Deb Canham Surger Sanity Projects. If you look, I have already posted the notes for this live in there. Okay. So somebody says, Eileen says, can you go back to the strip that you gathered in the center of the piece at the beginning of this session and tell us how you did that one again? Eileen, do you mean I did them both the same? I mean, I did them both the same. I just finished them differently. So just come back to me and tell me which one you mean for that. So yes, let me just go back to my slideshows. A couple more things I want to say. First of all, that I've got my 3 books. That's Working with Knits, Surger Sanity 1 and 2, and Surger Sanity 3. Now, they are downloadable books, but the best thing about them is they come with videos. You have access to videos to help you. So they are on sale this week, and you'll find them on my website, debcanhamstudio.com. I do want to say that Surger Sanity 1, 2, and 3 is really only suitable for the baby lock machines because it's written particularly for them. The Working with Knits is more general. It's about techniques, not about setups and things. So just to give you that information and to say that the online Surgery Club, our next meeting is Monday, July the 15th at 2 p.m. Eastern, and we will be making that purse on the right. So I have that here. It's real cute. It has flat lock stitch, rosette, and it has my braided handles. So let me show you that. And if you want to join that, you still can. You'll just get the first 3 projects you see there, including the gathered bag. You will get those as recordings, but you can go in and watch them as often as you want. And you can certainly come in and watch the live on the bag. Actually, it's interesting because more people watch the recordings than watch the lives. And I guess that's just the way life is, everybody's busy. So this is this month's project. It's kind of cute. I really like this fabric. So yes, and look, I got those 3 leaves. I didn't mean to do that. Yeah, and it's lined inside. It's probably got a hole in the bottom because I haven't sewn it up as I haven't yet. So yes, so it's nice and neat inside. And no, it doesn't have a pocket. And the reason it doesn't have a pocket is it's just always a little bit time challenging because it's a 2.5 hour project. But you could always put one in. So yes, any more questions, Richard? Lisa says more information on the online surgery club. The online surgery club runs for 6 months and we're already at month 4 is just coming up. But as I said, you can watch the previous ones. It works out $20 per class. And Rich is going, absolute bargain. So yeah, so this one runs until September and then I'll probably have a month off and then we'll start another session. So that is the plan. So I think that's probably just about all. If you have any questions, ask in the group, pick up your notes, they'll help you. And just think about using these ruffles because, they're so easy to put on. And they're all, I mean, one of the things I hate about ruffles is the gathers. I hate having to gather it because I think to myself, there's too many gathers, there's not enough gathers. Whereas with this, it's uniform. It's the same all the way across because the machine makes them. So I look forward to seeing you next Monday if I'm not seeing you before. I think Wednesday I have my Surgery Club in store at Sarasota. Then Thursday, I'm visiting the retreat in Sarasota. And then Monday, I'm doing another live. What is the date next Monday? Yes, I'm sure that's right. Oh, is it? Just let me check when I'm doing my yes, I won't do one if I'm doing that. So if I'm no. So it could be that there won't be a live next week. It's the 15th because I've got Surgery Club. But I will definitely be back the next week. So yes, it's Monday, July the 15th. So no live next week because I'll have done all afternoon teaching. So I'm not at my best. So the next date is the 22nd, 7 p.m. Eastern. Anyway, you guys have a great week. Post up. Let me know how you're going with your surging. And I hope that was useful to you. And thank you very much for watching. Bye.